Ever since they released the first Dune 3 trailer last week, Denis Villeneuve's final chapter in the Dune saga has been a hot topic. But what story can we expect to see unfold come December? Let's have a look. This is a video I'm very passionate about. Now, let me start out with saying that I don't want to state the obvious, but this video is going to contain a lot of spoilers, or rather theories of spoilers, because I'm just going off my knowledge of the books to try and predict what we're going to see in the third Dune movie, with the use of some evidence. I mean, it's not just me going wild here, but in case you want to be completely surprised when you walk into that theater on December 18th, I would advise you to skip on this video. On the other hand, look, Dune is a complicated story. It could help to kind of make more sense about everything that is about to happen. It's your choice. Are you still here? Cool. Here we go. Dune 3 fast forwards 17 years after the ending of the second movie. Now, Paul might not look a lot older, but trust me, he is. He just ages really slowly because of the spice in his blood. But yeah, at the end of the second movie, the Harkonnen were defeated. Paul is now the emperor, and he married Princess Urulan, the daughter of the previous emperor, Shaddam Corino IV. Oh no, he did not marry her for love. He married her for political reasons, and with one big restriction, which he's not happy about. She cannot bear him any children, which would effectively be the end of the Corina line of succession for the Emperor Sikh that has been going for 10,000 years. The only one that can carry Paul's children is his concubine, Chani. The thing is, at the end of the second movie, we see her riding off into the desert on top of one of the sandworms. Yeah, he was sleeping on the sofa that night. But she was rejecting Paul's new transformation into a religious and political leader. Well, tyrant, actually. Which is, by the way, quite different from the books. But I guess we're going to see that explained at the start of the third movie, because she is coming back. And the reason that they might reconnect is the fact that she is pregnant of the kids, the twins, and very important twins at that. But I'll come back to that later in the video. Now, in the book, they actually had a son before the twins were born, and that son was killed in one of the early raids on Arrakis, but in the movie they just skipped on that. In the trailer that we saw last week, we see Paul and Chani kind of talking about possible names for the kids. What if it is a boy? What if it is a girl? Turns out that it is twins. Now, they clearly did not know that that was going to happen, which is strange when you have your dad being Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib, but that also has a reason. It turns out that his son was hiding himself even when he was in the womb. But again, I'll come back to that later. But yeah, Chani returns to Paul, but I don't think they're going to have an easy ride in front of them. Paul is very much still a reluctant leader. He's the subject of a prophecy that he himself does not want to see fulfilled, but that in a way is almost inevitable. Which leaves him in a very overwhelmed state and making a lot of, well, chabby and kind of wonky decisions. It is going to make him look very bad. And that kind of raises the question, maybe this was the way it was supposed to go. Denis Villeneuve already hinted at this, and in the books, this is also a very clear breaking point. The Paul that we all have been rooting for in the first two movies is going to take a very hard turn. It is going to get violent, uncomfortable, and it is going to raise questions that you might have a hard time answering. Paul, in his role of the Lisan al-Gaib, basically unleashes a holy war. A jihad that will cost the lives of 60 billion people all over the universe. His fremen followers, his troops, his million of soldiers are sent throughout the whole universe with the help of the Spacing Guild of all factions, but they are the only one that can fold space, so. And they are very much a reluctant partner in this war. Not because they are good guys per se, but just because they don't like to be told what to do. And trust me, Paul is in complete control over the spice melange. And his very real threat to destroy the spice production, which they can see he can do and will do if they don't follow his orders, is a lot scarier for them than the guild helping him out during this war. However, they are looking for a way out. Edric, who is one of the navigators, well, he actually is not a navigator, he is a steersman, but that is a little too deep, I guess, in the lore. But he is in the Spacing Guild and part of a conspiracy that wants to kill Paul Atreides. We can actually see Erdrick, well, we can see his gravity tank rolling in at some point in the trailer, which is a pretty important moment. Now, in this last conspiracy, as it's called, literally that is the name, his role is to block the vision of Paul to make sure that he cannot see when they meet up, when they make their plans or whatnot. The other members of the conspiracy are the Bene Gesserit, Reverend Mother Mohaim, the Tleilaxu face swapper Skytail, who is actually being played by Robert Pattinson. You know that pale figure that walks into the shot at some point? Yeah, that's him. Interesting figure. I could make a whole separate video on that guy. If you want me to do so, let me know in the comments. And Princess Irulan, the wife of Paul Atreides. Like I said, she's not happy. On top of that, there's some Fremen defectors that are involved. But that is not super important right now. Because I want to leave the exact outcome of this conspiracy open for you to discover for yourself. But I think you can all take a wild guess. And when you took that wild guess, yeah, you're not even close. It is quite insane what is about to happen. Now, a part of that whole conspiracy plan is the return of Duncan Idaho. Well, kinda. As you might remember in the Saga movie, Duncan Idaho is brutally killed by the Emperor's troops as he is trying to kind of hold them back while Paul and his mother escape. It's a whole dramatic moment. Still gives me chills. But that was not the end for Jason Momoa. That was not the curtain call. He still had a role to play. Those Bene Tleilax that sent the face dancer that I was talking about earlier, they are basically genetical engineers. And they make all kinds of genetical oddities. They made a clone of Duncan Idaho called the Gola. The Golas are grown from the DNA of a person, but they don't have any of the memories. At least, they usually don't. And at the start, this one doesn't have those memories either. His name is Hyde, but they use him to trigger an emotion in Paul because Duncan Idaho was super important to him. He was his mentor, and having him die was one of the most impactful moments in Paul's life. So they offer him as a present, but it is a present that ends up turning against Paul. The thing is, it turns out that the link between Paul and Duncan is so strong that his genetic memory gets triggered and Duncan, his personality, takes control and basically rises, basically making the clone with the metal eyes into Duncan Idaho again, and becoming an influential figure for Paul Atreides, but also for his son, to the point where that family line keeps cloning him over and over again. I have heard people claim that he has been cloned over 25 times in very different personalities, some even female, others looking very differently, but it is always a Gola of Duncan Idaho. Now, Duncan is so close to the family, or Hyde, that he ends up marrying Paul's sister, Alia. You might remember her from the second movie. She was what they call a preborn. She was aware of herself and a lot more because she was exposed to the water of life. Alia was basically born with the genetic memory of thousands of people. Her whole heritage, everybody that came before her, basically lived in her head, which granted her certain powers, as we have seen. But it also poses a major issue. The thing is that she never got to develop her own personality, at least not fully, which made her very vulnerable to all of those thousands of voices. And those voices started to take control. One specifically. That made her into what the Bene Gesserit called the Abomination. She had the genetic voice of her grandfather, Vladimir Harkonnen, in her head. She basically became Vladimir to a certain extent. In the meantime, Paul is still struggling, as basically the whole world is turning against him. There's the conspiracy, but there's so much more going on. Basically, everybody hates him. His destiny beckons him, but he is not strong enough to fulfill it. And his destiny is the Golden Path. Now, if you've watched the trailer, you might have noticed that in the later part of the trailer, you hear this voice kind of chanting, basically. A chant that leaves very little to the imagination. It's very aggressive, it grows in power, and it is Paul basically chanting his own destiny. And the name of that track is The Golden Path. And I think that is basically what this movie is about. That is the backbone of Dune 3, The Golden Path. Now, I know I warned you before about spoilers, but I'm going to get serious here. What I'm telling you next is heavy spoilers. In other words, brace yourselves. The Golden Path is about destiny. About the destiny that Paul was not strong enough to fulfill. Just like his father, Paul was able to see into the future. You know, he had these dreams where he could see things that were going to happen or might going to happen. That was his way of looking into the future. That made his line powerful. Now, one of the things he saw at some point was the extinction of humanity. And that is not the first time that was a risk. Over 10,000 years ago, all advanced technology like thinking machines, computers were banned. They were forbidden. That's why we have these kind of factions like the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit. There is the Mentats, who basically took over all the calculated logical parts that a computer would do. And that was after a 100-year war that was called the Butlerian Jihad. That was when humanity rose up against AI, technology, and their creators. It was not just a rise against the machine, it was basically a rise against the machines and the people who used the machines to repress the rest of humanity. And humanity barely won. That was when they wrote the whole Orange Bible and whatnot, and all of technology was basically banned. That was also when the Corinna line started, but the story is slightly more complicated than that, but that is something for maybe a different video. However, that was not the end of the threat against humanity. And that's why there was the Golden Path. It is a fine line of events that need to unfold to make sure that humanity survives. Humanity needs to get to such a level of chaos, and they need to be spread apart over the galaxy so far that it becomes impossible to eradicate all of them. That is the end goal of the Golden Path. But that Golden Path requires a sacrifice for Paul to make. I mean, he might not be the most popular person in the universe right now, but that is as far as he wants to go. Because if he wants to follow the Golden Path, he needs to become a ruthless tyrant that takes ownership of everything in the universe and rules not with an iron fist, but with a, I don't know, diamond fist. He needs to be the biggest pain in the ass possible for the universe, for humanity at large. He needs to repress, he needs to kill billions of people to save humanity. Make sense of it if you can. A lot more than he did with the Fremen in the last 17 years. He needs to become the all-controlling, most hated leader in human history. To the point where people will rise up against him, make him fall, society will crumble, and they all will scatter all over the universe. Again, making it impossible to eradicate humanity. And all these different societies basically budding all over the universe. But like I said, Paul can't make that sacrifice because of his history, because of his personality. He just lacks the skills, the mindset, the power to do so. But his son, Leto II, the one that was hiding himself in his mother's womb, he does. And you know what? We know that they have cast Leto II and his sister, Ghanima. It's actually Jason Momoa's son, Nakoa Wolf, who is going to be playing Leto, or Leto II, and Ida Brooke is going to be playing Ghanima. And at some point, Leto II will do the same thing his dad did, and walk into the desert. But he is going to come back in a very different state. He is going to walk that golden path. He is going to become that tyrant, and he is going to rule 3,500 years before the uprising and him getting killed, and humanity saving itself by scattering all over the universe. And after those 3,500 years, he did not look pretty. He got completely disformed because he had a very special link with the sandworm larva, or the little makers like they call them in the movie. He basically kind of had them attached to him, and where they usually don't attach to humans, they did with him and created this whole organism around him. And he just melded with basically, yeah, sandworms. He looks ugly. There's different interpretations of his late state, but they all look butt ugly. It's a whole story by itself. And I'm kind of curious to see how far they're going to go into this story. How far they're going to go into explaining what happened to Leto II and his sister. Because there is quite a story right there. Slightly creepy. But they might leave a lot of that to kind of for us to discover by reading the books, or maybe someone is going to pick up in next trilogy of movies, who knows? It's not going to be Denis Villeneuve, because he is going to be directing the next Bond movie. Talking about a change of pace. But as I said, this movie is going to be very different from the first two movies. It is going to get very violent, uneasy, a lot of questions, but it should be really good. Because it is Denis Villeneuve. And his cinematography is, well, just simply amazing. Did you see the trailer? Good God. I cannot wait. And personally, I did not read all of the books. There's 23 of them. I read the first ones. And I do think there's going to be a way for them to round it up somehow without diving too far into the next story. Basically everything that happens in the next 3,500 years. Because I do think the main focus of this movie is going to be that golden path that he needs to walk and fails at on top of the conspiracy. And then near the end, we're going to see Leto II and his sister, maybe in a dream sequence, maybe one of those, foresight dreams that he has. That's about the extent of where we're going with the whole Leto II story, I think. We'll see. December 18th, and we can expect another trailer somewhere in the coming months. I'll keep you posted. make sure to subscribe. Now tell me, have you read the books or are you just a fan of the movie? Let me know in the comments. For now, however, that was it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It always helps me out. I also want to thank my YouTube members. You too can become a member right here on YouTube and unlock exclusive rewards. If you have a few minutes left, maybe check out one of my other videos. But above all, take care of yourself, take care of each other. Bye bye.